In this tutorial, we will start looking at accessing and manipulating data in the database. We will use the DAO pattern with Direct JDBC in our first example. We will identify the problems of this approach and why using the Spring JDBC template is a better solution than using Direct JDBC. For my YouTube students, this slideshow is part of a YouTube playlist. The playlist URL will be listed in the description and comments of this lesson. All source code for this playlist will be available for free in a GitHub repository. These are the high-level steps we will perform in this lesson. First, we will create a new JDBC 7 module with Maven inside IntelliJ, and now we will use the springbeans.xml file to define the data source. Then we will create a JDBC data access object interface and implementation. And finally, we will create a main method to test the JDBC create and read, or also known as insert and find. So here we are back in IntelliJ. So first let's have a look at our current branch. We are in the JDBC 7 start branch. Now we're going to have a look at the markdown documentation inside of Git. And here it says we're going to use a DAO with JDBC to insert a new charity and retrieve the charity from the database. So first step, JDB7, regular DAO. Let's go ahead with this first step. File, new module, name it JDB7 regular DAO. We create a new Maven module. We do not select create from archetype. Select next. Our title or our name is JDB7 regular DAO. Looking at our artifact coordinates, this all look good, and we hit finish. And here is our created module. We see it did create the parent, and it selected the Java 11. Let's have a look at the parent POM, and we see the parent POM has been updated. And now going back to our markdown documentation, we are going to create a package of company core designs. New package. And in step 3, it says we will use the JDBC2 module as a guide for setting up our data source. And we will add the MariaDB Java client dependency to the POM. We will also add all the required Spring Framework dependencies for the Spring Context and DataSource bean. And we will update the parent POM and global dependency version numbers. So let's have a look at our Spring 2 data source. We have the application.xml in resources that define the Maria data source bean. So we will copy this over. We will select Spring Facet, apply, and OK. Then we will look at the POM dependencies. Here we have the Spring version and the MariaDB client version. We need to bring that over. And then going back to look at our dependencies. We will also bring all of these dependencies over. Load Maven changes. And we see it picks it up. We are going to change this application.xml to beans.xml. Only in module JDBC 7. Let's go back to our markdown documentation. We've added the MariaDB Java client to the POM. We've added the Spring Framework dependencies to the POM, and we've updated the parent POM and global dependency version numbers. Now looking at step 4 is to create the charity DAO interface, and charity DAO implementation classes. So first we create the charity model object and its related model objects, category and program. And for this run, we won't be implementing the foreign key and the relationships between the models and in our charity database table. So back to IntelliJ, we create a model package. And in order to save time, this is where I will start cutting and pasting from my preparations. So the most important object module that we start with is the charity class. The charity class will map the charity table in the database back to the markdown documentation. So we've created the category and program, and now we're going to create the charity DAO interface and charity DAO implementation. So we'll create a new package for the DAO. And inside the DAO, we will create the charity DAO interface and the charity DAO implementation. And our interface will contain insert, update, delete, and find by charity tax ID. So looking at our charity DAO implementation class, we see that we have getters and setters for the data source. And this will get the data source from the Spring Beans file. And that's the reason we brought over all the Spring dependencies. And this is the insert charity. And we'll see we've got a defined SQL statement. We define a result set, set a connection to null, and then we do a try connection data source get connection. We create a prepared statement of insert charity, and we get all the values for our prepared statement from the charity that was passed into the insert. Then we run and execute update. We close the statement. If one row was updated, it means that the insert was successful, and we can get the primary index key back from the database that was generated by the database. And then finally, you'll see we have to catch any SQL exceptions first, and then we have to do this overly complex closing of our connection, and we can return the charity ID. Now, this is really legacy code. If you'll find a lot of code that has this type of final and closing of all the elements inside a JDBC implementation. As you can see here, the updated Java version of this is try with resources, which I've commented out here just as a demonstration. Now we will go to find by charity tax ID. You see we've got the SQL select query. We set up the charity and we set up the connection. Then we get the connection. We populate the prepared statement. We populate the first parameter with the tax ID that was passed in. We execute the prepared statement. We get the charity back from the database. We close the result set. We close the prepared statement, and we return the charity. And once again, there's a lot more management of the connection, and it is legacy code. So you will see a lot of older JDBC code where everything has to be closed in your code itself. So if you are working, you can update a lot of this by using try with resources. And I think this completes our second step. So back to our markdown documentation. Step 5, create the application with a main method that returns the insert and find methods. So we've defined our data source in the springbeans.xml file. And now inside the main method, we are going to use the Spring classPath XML application context to obtain the context and the Spring data source bean. And then we will create the DAO implementation object in the main method. And inside our main method, we will first create a new charity object and insert it using the DAO. And then we will find the inserted charity using the DAO. So back to IntelliJ, bringing over the main method. So this is the code in our main method. First we get the classPath XML context from Spring. Then we get the data source that's defined in the beans.xml. Then we create a new charity DAO implementation, passing in the data source. And now we create our first test charity. We specify the tax ID, the name, the mission, web address, Facebook address, and Twitter address. And then we run the insert charity and we print out the charity ID that was returned to us from the database. And the next step, we run the find by charity tax ID, passing in the tax ID of the charity that we've just inserted. And we print out the charity. Now back to our Markdown documentation for our final step. Now we are ready to run the application main method. First, we are going to clear out our database charity table in such a way that we do not have any foreign key relations in our tables. And then we are going to run the main method. And we are going to run it from within IntelliJ. And then inside the console output, we will have a look at the charity that we have inserted. So back to IntelliJ now. So let's look at what our charity looks like now. And we see it's quite a populated charity table. So we will go back to our original SQL here. So we will clear out the charity table and create a new charity table. Execute. That looks good. Have a look at the charity again. It has been cleared out. Let's just make sure that all of our other tables have been cleared out. Category, charity program, and program. So that essentially means we have an empty blank slate charity database. So let's do our Maven build first, and then we will run our main method from within IntelliJ. We run clean install in our root POM. And now for the major test. We select main, right click, and run main. According to the console output, we have successfully created the charity and inserted with charity ID 1, and we were also able to retrieve it. So let's have a look at the database. And there we see that the charity has in fact been inserted into the charity table. And that means we have done a successful demonstration of using regular Direct Java JDBC. And this concludes this tutorial. I will see you in the next tutorial.